Hey guys, Dr. Snellgrove here, recording kind of like a second video talking about oral reports in our book. So this basically starts on page 317. And these are good companion pieces to the video that will also be up shortly about our oral report major assignment. In the meantime, let there be light. I know the last video was very dark. It's not that my office is any less dark now. I just got one of these ring light things. No, I will not be launching a streaming career anytime soon. I know you're on pins and needles waiting for that. All right. So because this is a continuation of what we talked about before, it obviously has some overlap, some things that, we've talked about to a greater or lesser extent before. So some of this I may go over a little quicker than others. As always, of course, if there's any of this that you'd like to discuss more, one-on-one, you can email me, you can text me, 863-835-2399, all that good stuff. So some of this we talked about before. What do I know about my audience? Are they people I know and people that know me, or maybe not? Do I know how they feel about me? Do I know how they feel about the topic that I am going to be discussing? All of this is going to help you modulate not just the content you prepare, but the way you deliver that content in an oral report. What is my purpose in giving the oral presentation? Do you have short-term and long-term purposes or not? It's okay if the answer is no. What is the problem or situation that prompted this presentation? That idea, we talked about this a bit. I think some people struggle with this idea in the second major assignment, but basically, you're presenting solutions. Your recommendations previously were like solutions. Like, okay, well, if those are solutions, what was the problem? What was it you were trying to solve? And then, given my audience's background and attitudes, do I need to revise my purpose to make my presentation more acceptable to my audience? Now, here in this academic setting, you can always play with that. In boring corporate settings where you might be the person giving these reports, you don't always have that choice, right? Everyone I think has heard the phrase, don't shoot the messenger. Sometimes that's you. Sometimes you are truly the bearer of bad news there. And so it's like, well, the only way out is through. Okay, so I know we're keeping things pretty simple for our own assignment, but out there in the real world, what kind of presentation will I give? Is it going to be, completely in person? Is it going to be live by video or a screencast? Is it a recorded video or a recorded screencast? Is it even going to be something like a podcast? And the book doesn't really elaborate on this at this point, but it's basically in many ways the medium determines the message, right? There are visual advantages that you can take advantage of in like a live presentation that you can't with a podcast, but there's also things you can do in an audio only medium that you couldn't do necessarily in person. So just knowing exactly how you're going to be delivering this report is going to change the shape of how you deliver the report. Okay, so what do I know about the location where I will give my presentation? I swear we talked about this in previous videos, so I don't want to belabor it, but sometimes you're giving a presentation on the go, or maybe it's just an unfamiliar room in your organization. And it's like, yeah, it's good to get there ahead of time. Make sure you can hook your computer up to the projector, make sure that your presentation is coming off of your jump drive just fine. All that good stuff. You want to make sure that's rocking and rolling, before you get started. And then this is an extension of what we're talking about before, but what previous or probable events in the organization could influence how my audience perceives my presentation? So the audience, if they may not have any problem with you per se, but maybe you represent maybe you're giving a report from the upper administration and they've made some decisions recently that are unpopular with the rest of the workers. That happens a lot. So that might again affect how you are perceived, which in turn might affect how you choose to go about your presentation. All right. Content. What ideas do I want to include and exclude? So, I mean, this is the same stuff you're always considering, but it's like, hey, any kind of oral report can only go so long. And for that matter, you can only command people's attention for so long. Some of y'all are looking at my lecture and you're looking at the clock like, yeah, I don't all say. And so you want to be mindful. What ideas do I want to include and exclude? And I feel like I'm always saying this, but this is another distinction between this kind of communication and say typical academic writing, where you might do a research paper. It's like, oh, I got to show every inch of my research methodology here in this paper before I submit it to the journal. Well, yeah, the journal and its readers will want to know that. A wider audience, though, that's not really what they're interested in. They're going to not want so much process. They're going to know raw facts, raw data, and what your recommendation in this case would be. All right. So much of this I feel like overlaps. What difficulties do I need to anticipate in choosing what to discuss? That's again just a matter of knowing your material and knowing your audience and making adjustments. Will any ideas be misconstrued and prove harmful to me or my organization? So normally I try to be a glass half full kind of guy, although this glass is half empty in case you were curious. But this is one of those things to be mindful, like, hey, an oral report. I am literally a spokesman for my company. And so I do need to be mindful of saying or doing anything that's going to make my company look bad, might cost me my job, might be a real ripple effect there if I'm not very careful about what I say and how I say it. So I got a section here. What kind of illustrations will I need? Where should I put them? Those are relevant questions, right? Because, you want to make sure you're only bringing in imagery that enhances what you have to say. But at the same time, it's like, all right, well, where do I put that in there? Like some of you all have, well, all of you now have experience when you were putting your own presentations together. Like I'm putting an image here, an image there. So an oral report, it's like, all right, do I want to, have a slide that's primarily an image and I use that to provoke a discussion? Do I want to include the image along with some other stuff, or will that make it difficult to focus on the image and the other stuff and what I'm saying? So it's I don't think this is in your book, but in certain businesses, certain fields, it's actually become very popular as a presentation format where somebody brings a bunch of images and they speak for like 5 seconds on an image and then they move on. And it's sort of that idea of like, let's focus on one big thing at a time instead of putting too much stuff up here that we can't really focus on. Style, basically what image do I want to project? And so that's the eternal tug of war is the image that you want to project. You might be like, I'm a cool rebel, I'm a rule breaker, I play by my own standards. And then it's like, again, I'm a company representative. So it's usually finding a balance between your personal style and what the organization is or finds acceptable. What level of language do I need to use based on my audience's background and knowledge of my subject? So we've talked a lot about that before, but the basic idea of, hey, I'm speaking to my colleagues. I've got a certain language. We're buddies. We make jokes day in, day out. I'm going to use a certain level of language there. Then, oh, here's an oral report for the CEO that I see like once per year at the Christmas party. All right, I'm going to go about that very differently because it's a different person. And of course, because he has different knowledge than the others. It sounds like it is textbook. I was going to say it sounds like textbook, but like different people know different things. So you have to modulate your message to suit them. All right, let's see. We're talking about what approach will my audience expect from me. So again, that's like living up to the audience expectations, but also, if it's your own workplace, not putting too many noses out of joint, we hope. And how formal or informal should I be in addressing my audience? All right. So we talked about this on the last video kind of a lot. So I didn't want to really get into it, but they talked about like speaking to international audiences. It's like, well, you want to know as much about the locals, the culture, and the language as humanly possible. Consider your own appearance. Are you dressing in a way that looks respectable and professional according to local custom? Do you have any illustrations in your presentation that might be off-putting or otherwise misunderstood? and of course your own words. I think we talked about last time, like you don't necessarily want to be using a lot of idioms and weird little phrases that make sense right here and then might make no sense to somebody who lives in another country. All right. Whew. So now that you are, with all that in mind, this is on like the bottom half of 318. That's where I'm going to try to go a little faster now. But it's like, all right, it says, as you're going through, if you can find a sentence or paragraph that's difficult to understand, stop, reread the passage as many times as necessary to decipher its meaning. In listening to live presentations, however, you're rarely able to interrupt. All right. So this is a whole section on something I was just muttering about really a moment ago. And I feel like I'm speaking for the ADHD people basically here. But yeah, the idea is that, you can only pay attention to so many things at once. And so it's like, all right, I need to kind of almost work backwards from like, all right, if I've got slides as part of my presentation, like, all right, what is what do I want to cover in this slide? And then I work my way backwards to what kind of image or imagery do I need to create? And what is the simplest and most direct way I can discuss this concept? So it's like, I've got plain words that are, nobody can misunderstand. I've got a single image for them to focus on. It doesn't mean nobody will ever get confused. That's why people write stuff down during presentations, but it does make sure that, you're less likely at least to overwhelm people. All right. So it's got some of the classic stuff. You choose an interesting title as always. If your title is boring, if you're boring the reader from the very beginning or the audience from the very beginning, it's tough to get them to pay attention to other things. All right. Developing your presentation around 3 main divisions. So it's like we've got our intro, where you promise to cover a list of ideas, body, where you discuss the ideas, and conclusion, where you wrap things up. So again, we're not like I don't know, redesigning the wheel or whatever, reinventing the wheel. It's like, all right, this is the same way that you typically organize information in both the written form and now in the spoken form, same deal. All right. So what are you doing in the introduction? Like, all right, we're trying to get their attention, obviously. We're trying to provide, relevant information about this topic. I often tell students the good intro, the goal of it, arguably maybe the whole goal, is to get the reader on the same page as you. It's like, hey, they can't process everything else you've got to say about this potentially very complex topic if you haven't told them much about it. And so it says that if it's appropriate, you can introduce your topic with a startling fact, a relevant anecdote, a rhetorical question, or a statement designed to arouse your audience's interest. In other words, they don't use the term, but that's a hook, something early on to get our attention. I did think this was kind of interesting. It says, if your audience is unreceptive or unfamiliar with the subject, you may want to provide a little extra background, and then they have a few techniques in there to help people understand what you are talking about. So acknowledge that you perceive the problem your audience has with you or your topic. So it's not like, look, I get it. Many people find this kind of confusing. Establish a common ground with the audience. Like, I found it pretty confusing too, but once I looked into this, I was surprised how much it helped me save time and money. Attempt to refute, if you can do so efficiently and politely, any erroneous assumptions you believe the audience may have about your subject. Now, I know a lot of people in talk, and there's a lot of stories out there. Some people even claim blah, blah, blah. However, when you think about it, that's not true, because so you kind of like anticipating counter arguments, arguing against them. Then ask the audience to allow you the opportunity to present your information as objectively as possible. So it's like, look, there's a lot of rumors out there. It's very easy to get confused. I'm going to lay all this out, help all of you make up your minds for yourself. That's the idea. I'm not trying to hold my examples up there. They're the greatest examples we've ever had, but just a basic idea there of like acknowledging the elephant in the room, that they don't know this much about this, or, are worried about something. Bring up yourself the counter arguments that they might be thinking about, and then, show why the counter arguments are incorrect. All of this is a way of getting the audience up to speed and getting the audience on your side before you dive into the body. All right. And so the body of this, I mean, it's always, this is just like you've done this before multiple times now. Where it's like whatever you are arguing for, like in the technical report recommendation thing, it's like, all right, you have a recommendation now, you need to back up why, this is a good recommendation. So same thing with, whatever argument you introduced in your intro, the body is where you develop that. And I always tell people it's easier said than done, but imagine that it's kind of like having a kid brother or kid sister nearby. Imagine that you've got somebody, well, why? They want to know more about it. Like, why should we do this? Well, why? Well, you're going to walk through all of the compelling arguments, compelling reasons, data-driven reasons, evidence, driven reasons for why we need to do something. And then the conclusion. All right, so it's like, all right, you need to wrap up, key arguments, key recommendations, restate them. We talked about that, but especially in an oral form, an oral report, there's the idea this is your chance to end big, end on an emotional note, a memorable note, or fire people up, whatever it is that you want to do. So it's easier said than done, as always, but your book recommends finish with a brief anecdote, pertinent quotation, vivid example, or a call for action. So that's the idea where I try not to say it too much and sound like a snobby professor, but I've read so many papers and heard so many speeches over the years or oral reports over the years where it just kind of tapers off. Like it gets to the end and the person is just, man, they're happy to be to the end of all this. And it shows. But it's like, instead, think of it like this is your chance to leave them, like hopefully you've heard some memorable quotes before in your time, some things that have stuck with you. Now it's your chance to bust out one of your own. What kind of final note can you end this thing on that makes people think, yes, we do need to go, with that call to action. We do need to put that recommendation in place. Basically, we don't talk about it as much in this class as you do in composition, but this is kind of like the old ethos, pathos, logos. And one of the things you learn in composition is that pathos is a way of arguing, emotional appeal, relying on people's emotions, that is a way to argue. And so this is one of the things that you can do more or less, right? The idea of like, I'm going to end, get people fired up, end on an emotional note where they're really ready to get something done. Along the way, that also made them trust me. That also made them likelier to believe what I'm trying to get them to believe. So it's a rhetorical technique as much as it is a speaking technique. All right, so I'm going to try to go a little quicker here. We've got some stuff. Some of this we might split to another. I don't know. Let's see if we can power through. So if you look on page 320, there's a section on choosing an effective delivery style. All right. And so this is, I don't know how many of you might have taken a speech class before. You might be taking a speech class now. Professor Ronnie Stanley, a good colleague and friend. But yeah, here's some basics for speaking. And they have some good news here at the top of 320, which basically like pretty much the rules for clarity in writing are the same when it comes to clarity for speaking. Keep your sentences short and simple. Try to have just one key idea per sentence. Try to use active voice, for the love of God, avoid passive voice. Avoid long, intricate sentences, which in writing, you're going to have naturally a mixture of longer sentences and shorter sentences. But when you're listening to someone speak, if they have a really long sentence, it can be, wait, where did he start with this? Where's this going? I lost track. Avoid abstract polysyllabic words. So that's just the way, and I always think about Kevin from The Office when I use many words, when few words do trick. So this is saying that yes, when it comes to speeches, it's actually good to keeping words to fewer syllables if possible is another way of being, straight and direct and to the point here. All right. Avoid jargon unless you're sure that your audience will understand specialized vocabulary. So jargon is basically the double-edged sword. If you are familiar with your audience, like maybe you're in the same field, then you can bust some jargon in as a way of kind of like getting their trust. Like, hey, we speak the same language. We've dealt with some of the same issues. But you can imagine if you're using the jargon for one field in a presentation to like a completely different department, they might look at you like, what the hell are you talking about? So just be careful with it. All right, making sure the audience can comprehend you. Okay, so clearly identifying your sections. There's different things you can do on here. We're going to review real quick to emphasize. So allow a slight pause to occur after you've completed your introduction and then announce your first topic. So this is something we're going to come back to probably repeatedly in this unit and in this assignment. But the idea is that there are pauses in speech, and in a perfect world, the pauses in speech should be like intentional. The idea that if I pause, if I pause, someone just looked up, that had this running on in the background or something. When you pause, it's meant to kind of get people's attention. So you can do that same thing, a pause between your introduction and, your first real like body content here to help get somebody's attention. All right, announce each topic as you come to it, so your audience knows when you completed one topic and starting the next. So this is shades of the technical report that you've already completed. If you said in the intro, we're going to work on XYZ, and they know XYZ are coming. And so then you can have sections that start out, you're like, when it comes to X, it's important to know that. That's you announcing that we have reached, the prophecy has come true. We're now talking about the stuff I said we were going to talk about. After completing your final topic in the body of your presentation, allow a slight pause before you begin your conclusion. So basically just imagine these as mirror images of each other. Slight pause gets us from introduction to body and then from body to conclusion. All right, so enunciating your words. So if you haven't had to do a lot of public speaking, this can be a little weird, but the idea is that you're careful as you pronounce words. You speak slowly but enthusiastically. So if you are really slow but robotic, like, it turns people off. But if you go really fast, 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 it freaks people out. So the idea is to, speak slowly, speak clearly, and if possible, speak enthusiastically. Practice, practice, practice. Everybody has that moment. I have it every single time I fire up one of these videos. Like, do I really sound like that? It can be weird hearing yourself. It can be weird just, speaking for prolonged periods of time. If you're used to just back and forth conversations, the idea like, all right, I'm going to sit here 5 minutes and talk about this thing. That's something you might not have had to do before ever. So you can practice in front of a mirror, in front of a computer, in front of Zoom, for God's sake. I'm looking at myself yakking right now. All of that can be good practice. Speaking of Zoom, recording yourself. You're going to have to eventually, record this anyway and submit it to me. And so this can be a great opportunity to record yourself, get an idea of how you look, how you sound, figure out what you might want to tweak with any of this. Here's a difficult one on 321. A lot of people struggle with this. Keep it conversational. So you do need to know your material pretty well. You need to have it memorized, ideally. But you don't want this to look like you're just, reading off a cue card or something like that. So the idea is that you've memorized this so well, you can just bring it up like, oh, we're just having a conversation. Oh, speaking of that, it's important. We should really focus on. And so people pay more attention that way. Like, it's not just a sit and get conversation, or I'm sorry, a sit and get like the lecture at me, but instead it feels at least like a conversation between two people. Y'all see me, I've been doing this a long time, and even though we're just doing this digitally, I'm automatically doing this like unconsciously at this point. Use gestures and eye contact. So people don't like it when you are just sitting in one position and looking down and reading your prepared spiel. It's weird. So in a room, they like you to look around. I've tried to kind of sort of do eye contact while looking in the right area of the camera. I don't always succeed, but you try to do eye contact. Like when I'm teaching face to face, I try to meet people's eyes as I'm talking. Make gestures. I'm constantly making hand gestures and other things. It makes you look alive. It helps you keep the energy up, and it helps keep the room engaged. All right. You have any handouts? Save them for the end. So we'll talk, I think, in the fullest time about some handouts that can be, well, handy. But again, speaking for the ADHD people of the world, you give somebody a handout early on, that's all they're going to focus on. There's at least some people are not going to focus on your words because they're looking at the thing. Explain your slides if you have to. Basically, just never assume that they automatically know what the slide means. Encourage questions. you know, I know your teachers are always doing this, but like it's good in presentations. It's like, again, it gives the idea this is not a sit and get. You know, you have an opportunity to pose questions. I will answer questions to the best of my ability, that kind of thing. And answer questions concisely, you know, basically people are gonna have open and honest questions, and you don't want to give them a long rambling answer. And if it's you know, if you don't have a definitive answer and I don't know, or we'll have to look into it, you know, is acceptable. But basically be as definitive as you can and be as quick and clear and concise as you can. All right. So we've got some stuff here about designing and presenting the poster presentation. I'm going to skip this section for now. I hope that's acceptable to you, but we're basically poster presentations are in vogue in certain fields still, but it's not something we're really making you do in as part of this class. So I was going to kind of skip over that. I did want to look, I guess this would be our last section. If you look at 324 going on to 325, we have a section here about designing and presenting the scripted presentation. All right. And so the idea is that, like, all right, you may want to or need to, in circumstances, come up with like an actual, you know, script. In a perfect world, like we were just talking about, you're going to just, you know your own material backwards and forwards. You can present it like we're just having a friendly conversation, but you might have to create an actual scripted presentation. That's usually because like the script is going to be printed and given to people. Like this happens sometimes at academic conferences. You know, here's a copy of the text. Here's what this person's about to say, and so you just want to be mindful of that. Like, okay, this because this script is going to be read and people are going to hear you. It's like, okay, it's very important to be careful with this. And it's like, all right, what should you do when you are writing the script? All right, keep your sections separate. Limit each section to one idea. Honestly, you should be doing that anyway. Avoid too many details, excessive detail. Number certain sections to help your audience follow your key points. Like it's not an essay. Nothing keeps you like section 1, section 2, or labeling however you want to. Avoid long sentences. We've been talking about that, but it distracts people in spoken form in particular. Edit sentences for unnecessary words. Again, short to the point if at all possible. Again, use active voice whenever possible. Type your presentation in a large type, 12-point type or larger, triple space, and leave wide margins. So it may sound weird, but like in the written form of your script, people might want to actually be writing, in between margins on the sides. This gives them room to do so. Consider using illustrations if they clarify your point. But other than that, it's the same deal that we've been talking about. You practice that presentation backwards and forwards until you have it. But don't worry, for the big assignment that we are doing for our own oral report, you guys do not have to have a script ahead of time. Make one, that's completely on you. Whew. All right, that's about it. If you have any questions about this or anything else, y'all know the drill. Feel free to email me or feel free to text me at 863-835-2399, and y'all have a good one. Bye.